And Jen, you can go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks y'all for coming. My name is Jen Upton. I am a design director here at Willow Tree in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I've been for about the past 3.5 years. Like I said, I'm currently based in Charlottesville, Virginia, where our team is about 20 or so designers, and we have a lot of other designers in our other offices in Durham, North Carolina, Columbus, Ohio, and most recently, Vancouver, British Columbia. So it's great to be here, and we're going to talk about components in a design library. I'm going to pass it back to Rebecca to talk about the sponsors real quick.
Thank you. Yeah. So really quickly, we just want to shout out our sponsors again. Without them, this Design-a-thon would not be possible. So we'd like to thank Sketch, Rice University Center for Career Development, the Lilly Lab here at Rice, Third Slant, Rosenfeld. And then on the next slide, we have Wolfram Language, Rice's Fondren Library, Neighbors, Sticker Giant, and A Book Apart. And then we are having a giveaway for this workshop. So 5 attendees will each win a design-related paperback book courtesy of Rosenfeld. So you must be present on Zoom during the entire workshop. We'll be sending the sign-in sheet at the end of the workshop, and then we will be announcing the 5 winners at our closing ceremony on Sunday. So make sure you guys stay until the end for a chance to win a free book.
Woohoo, yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oops, there we go. So like I said, my name is Jen. I've been at Willow Tree for a couple of years now. I've been helping create some really cool digital products with the world's leading brands that impact millions of users. I've actually gotten a chance to work with a couple of financial services clients, which I know some of y'all are working on fintech projects. I also have recently worked on a healthcare client, so I've touched that space as well. Right now, I am working on helping a new brand, or not a new brand, a pretty big brand launch their new logo and new look and feel on their website. In the past, I've done apps for theme parks, museums, and a whole lot more. And I've only ever worked at agencies, so I'm super familiar with the timeline that y'all are working at. I know what it's like to design under a lot of rapid pressure, and I know that y'all have about 24 hours to go. So keep pushing. My only advice to y'all is to not overthink it and go with what's best for the user and keep on keeping on. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about components and a design library. My goal here is to kind of make this interactive and design it the way that y'all really need it. So I hope y'all will use the chat. I can kind of keep tabs on it, or if you have any questions as we're going, go ahead and use the raise hand function. I know a lot of y'all might be relatively new to design. Maybe today is going to be the first time that you've ever opened Figma. Is that the case for anyone here? I'm going to take stunned silence as a no, that maybe some y'all have opened Figma before. Has anybody used anything other than Figma? Like I've used Sketch, and I'm wondering if anybody else has used Sketch as well as like Adobe Illustrator or anything like that. Adobe XD, yep, I've used that one as well. Cool. Okay, well, if you have used Sketch before, Figma's components are very similar to Sketch's symbols. So if you're familiar with that, this may be a little bit easy for you to kind of make the kind of switch back and forth. If you've used Adobe XD, I can't remember what Adobe XD calls their equivalent of this feature, but I believe they also have something similar. If you've used other Adobe products, like linked assets is another kind of way of thinking about it. But if this is your very first time, then you're in the right place anyway, because we're going to start from the very beginning. So what we're going to do is set the stage a little bit. So let's say you are working on, designing an iOS application that has a ton of screens. Like you've kind of spread them all out on this artboard. You have all of these flows kind of going in and out of different areas of an application. Let's say maybe it's a banking app or something, which is a lot of what these screenshots are actually. So if you're working with multiple designers across all of these screens, a lot of things are moving, a lot of things are changing, but you're feeling really good because clearly you've created a lot up until this point. But all of a sudden, you've got a key investor in this product. They've taken a look at everything you've done, and while they're super impressed, they've got a little bit of feedback. They decided that they wanted to make kind of a couple of design updates, and you figure, all right, it's no big deal. We're in a great place. So what could possibly kind of go wrong here? Well, the first thing that they want to change is they want to change the color of an icon that you're using. And it's an icon that you've got on every single screen. Like, let's say maybe it's like the back arrow icon, which you've kind of got that everywhere. And then after that, after you kind of take that feedback in, they say that they want to change the height of the buttons that you're using. And it's on like a bunch of different screens. And then there's this photo that you're using and they want to update it since they decided that they want to change this photography style. So you're taking all of this feedback in and you're thinking, okay, this is a lot of stuff on a lot of different screens. This is really overwhelming, but like we have this team of designers, I bet we could do it. But then all of a sudden the investor says, oh yeah, I need it for a presentation that's tomorrow. So what do you do now? You're probably sitting there and thinking, how am I going to get all this done? This is a lot to do in such a short time. Maybe you're feeling a little panicked right now. How are you and the team going to be able to get this done in time for this presentation tomorrow and still accomplish additional flows and things that you're working on? And you want to make sure that these updates that you're making are consistent everywhere. You don't want to miss the screen that like maybe is using a button and you didn't realize it, or if one of the other designers is working on something and you didn't realize it, you want to make sure it's updating everywhere. Even if you had split the work, there's naturally going to be pieces that you miss. So how do we prevent all of this? And you're probably thinking, this is where we're going to talk about components, right? And you'd be exactly right. Components are elements that you're going to reuse across your design. They're going to help ensure that all design screens and the designers that you're working with are being consistent. They can also be an incredible time saver, especially in the case of like this investor update. When you update the first component, it's going to update all of its children throughout your file. So if you think of it kind of like a parent and child relationship, your parent is the very first component that you make. There's certain things that you can update to the child that don't necessarily correlate to the parent. We're going to get to that in a moment. But really, when you make those updates at the highest level, they're going to help filter through. So in the case of, say, the icon, you've changed the color of the icon in the parent component, that will update all of the ones immediately below it. You change the height of the button in that parent component, all of the other buttons will update accordingly. And so if you're sitting here thinking like, okay, this sounds really great, what maybe are some examples of components? Let's kind of think together. Does anybody, if you want to throw it in the chat, can you think of examples of what a good component might be other than the two I kind of just gave away? Headings, it's a good example, yes. What else? Transitions. Ooh, transitions is actually going to be something that we talk a little bit about in the design system, but yes, that belongs kind of in this same realm. Picture captions is another good one. Yep. Repeatable buttons like cancel, submit, perfect example. Yes. So other examples that I've got, we've got buttons, form fields. Think about if you've got a sign-in form and a sign-up form and maybe some contact us form. You're using the same form fields throughout your project. Drop-downs, another great example that go along with form fields. Toggles, if you've got things that are turning on and off, maybe some settings, things like that, you're using that component a lot. I mentioned icons. Navigation, this is true on both native applications and a web application. Your navigation is probably going to be on every single screen that you're making. So that's something that you're going to repeat over and over again. Some of the other ones that people don't always think about, modals. If you've got some pop-up modals in your app, those get repeated a lot. So those are great components. Maybe you've got cards using images and text together a lot. That's another great example of a component. Text box, we talked about headings. That's another great example of one. The logo, you've probably got the logo for the product that you're making on quite a few different screens. So you want to make sure that you've got that as a component. And then there's so much more. Like we've talked about some of them, and as you're kind of thinking more and more about how to utilize these, you'll probably come up with other ways of thinking about components that may be even more than this. So thinking about all of these things, I think the other thing that I want to call out is there's certain things that are repeated a lot, but come more into play with a design library. An example of that is color. We want to think about things that color is applied to, and that's where it kind of comes into components. We will get to color a little bit. So, like I said, it kind of comes down to both the small elements, like buttons and icons and things, but it also you can think about components being inside of other components. An example of that would be a tab bar navigation that maybe you have at the bottom, where you have a component inside of a component. So you may have like 4 navigation items across the bottom. Each one of those icons and text or just icons would be a component, and then that goes inside of your navigation, which is also a component. We're going to talk a little bit about those as well. So before I get into a little bit of a Figma demo, are there any questions? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and walk through Figma, but feel free to either try it on your own, or I can actually like share the Figma file if you want to follow along with me. Let's see. I just shared it in the chat if anyone wants to play along, or we're going to look at my screen together. All right. So let's say for this example, we're going to make a button. So some things we need in a button. We need the words that go on the button. We need a color for the background. Maybe we have buttons that have an icon in them as well. So what I'm going to do is type out a text box, or really I just clicked on the screen and used the type tool to write what's going to be in my button. I'm going to start with a submit button and go with this one. I'm going to adjust the typography to my liking. Let's say bold. We're going to stick with white in this example. And then you can accomplish adding the color to your button in a few different ways. The way that I'm going to do it is using auto layout. So what you'll want to do is put your text inside of a group. So I'm going to do Command G because I don't actually know how to do it without key commands. And that puts it in a nice little group. We're going to call it button over here in the layers panel on the left. I'm going to try and go nice and slow. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. And then what we're going to do in here to automatically add that padding and margin is over here on the right side, there is a panel called auto layout. I'm going to hit the plus sign over here. And what's going to happen now is it turns into a little icon where, to me, it kind of looks like piano keys, but really it's aligning to what these different alignments are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some spacing on the side and some padding on the top and get to a height that's appropriate for a button. So for vertical, so I've already got a 22 height, so I'm going to add 16 to the top and the bottom, and that's automatically going to add that spacing for me here. And then on the sides, I'm going to go with 16 as well. That feels plenty big enough for a button. And then now I can apply a fill, which it's going to automatically go to white. I don't really want that. I'm going to go with green. Green feels like a good submit button. I'm gonna pick something nice and dark because we're thinking about accessibility. We want to make sure that we've got that. So now I've got my button. That's great. Cool. And what I want to do now is say, okay, this is the button style that I'm going with. So when I'm ready to make a component, I'm going to go up here and click on this icon that looks like 4 squares. There's also a key command. It's telling me it's Shift Command K. You can do that as well. And then once you've created a component, you'll see, and this is the case in both dark and light mode for Figma. I know I'm in dark mode. It'll turn purple instead of blue, and that's how you know you've created a component. The icon will also show up next to your group name, and that's how you know you've got your first button component. Now, if I were to take this component and use it on another screen, I would copy it. And now I've got a second button over here. Now you'll notice that the dots and the button are gone from this one. That's because this is the child of this original button component. You can also see over here that when it's just a square and doesn't have the tiny little squares inside of it, that means that it's not the original component. If you're working on a different page or you're somewhere else in the file, let's say we're going to go over here to a different page. I've got my button over here and I'm thinking like, oh, I want to make an update. How can I get back to that original one faster? If you're over on the right side where you can see that you're using the button component over here, and I want to go back to the original one, you can click on the 4 dots here and it will take you back wherever in the file you are, back to that original component so you can make those updates. Any questions before I keep going? And y'all are quiet. Need some coffee?
Sorry, I have a question. Can you please
Yeah.
go over how to find the original parent again?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
So
you.
I am somewhere else in the file. I've got this component here and I want to go back to the original. If I'm on the right side over here where it's got the button, I can see which component it is. There's an icon here that looks like the 4 dots, and that'll show the go to main component when you hover. And when you click that, you can go back to the original one.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then as a bonus, when you do that, this little modal will show up at the bottom and you can make whatever changes you wanted to make here and return back to that screen that you once were. So it's relatively painless to go back and forth between those instances. Cool. So let's say now you want to update your button and you want to say, okay, I don't like green anymore. I want to go with blue. So you go into your button and you say, all right, let's pick a nice blue here. This one's working quite nicely. I'm pretty happy with that. I close it, and now my buttons everywhere are utilizing this blue color. And that change was incredibly painless. So much easier than going to each individual button and changing them side by side. If you want to change the text in this button, instead of submit, you want to do send, it will update accordingly everywhere that you're using that component. So it's very, very easy to do that. Now you might be thinking, that's really great, but I want to use the same button style, but not necessarily have the same text everywhere. I don't want to have to create a new component every time I want to do a send button, every time I want to do a cancel button, every time I want to do that. You're right, that would be painful. So what you can do is, rather than updating the parent component, if you need a send button, but you also need a submit button, you can update in the child different text options, but still maintain the overall style. So I've created this submit button, and I'm also going to go ahead and create a cancel button. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but now I want to have rounded corners. Do I need to update all of these to do rounded corners? No, I can go back to the parent component and I can add my rounded corners. And all of these have rounded corners now, but maintained the same text. Any questions on that so far?
Yeah, sorry, I have a question.
Yeah,
So like in our app design, there probably is going to be a lot of buttons and a lot of pages.
for
So
sure.
can we change these like buttons and put them in different page groups or something, and they will still maintain this connection to the parent?
Yes, you can
Okay.
put them in different pages, and they'll still maintain the connection to this piece.
Okay.
Just like this one over here, because this is actually a different page. And if I've got different art, but the same with different artboards, it will all remain connected to this parent.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. And by that same token, so we've only changed text so far. It's still true about color as well. So if I say for cancel, I want to do red for cancel. I can still change this one to be red and only change this cancel instance. And now I'm not updating the original one, but if I wanted to say, oh no, I want to go back to non-rounded corners, it's going to still remember that this is connected to the parent component and update accordingly. The other thing that you can do in the case of components is when you're creating a button, let's say you have different states of a button. You have a button that is active. You have one that you want for a hover state, which isn't really applicable for native, but if you're working on a web app, you've got a hover state, and you want to create multiple design differences for each of those. And let's do a pressed version. So what you're going to want to do here is you can create different instances. What's the actual word that I'm looking for? Let me think for a moment. Variables, that's the word that I'm looking for. Different variables of the same component. They're all still buttons, but they're showing different things. So for hover, let's say we want to make this a little bit darker. And then for pressed, we want to go even darker. We want to go like real dark navy when a button is pressed. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make it its own component. So it's going to be separated a little bit from the parent. You're going to want to click this button up at the top. And it's still called button in this case. And we're going to get to that in a moment. Same for pressed. So now they're each their own component here. But when you have them all selected like this one, a new button appears over here, and it's the combine as variants button. So when you click that, now they're all called button, but they're different states. So for example, this one we're going to call the default state. This one is hover, and then this one is pressed. I'm going to go over that again. I know I just went that really fast. So each of these, while still are a button, they have different states. So when I go and create a child of any of these buttons, now I've got this drop down over here where I can quickly change, is it the default state, the hover state, or pressed? So if I've got like, I can change different states depending on which one that I want. Oh, that updated the text. I don't know why that happened. And that's a different variable inside of the same component. So I'm going to show that again because I know that one was a little more complicated. So you've got your original component, you've got a hover state, you've got a press state. You want to make each of them their own components using that icon at the top where you create a component. And then when you've got them all here, you want to select all. I'm just dragging to select. And then you click this button, combine as variants. So now you've got a properties panel here. You can rename what the property is. In this case, it's the state of the button. So I'm going to call it the state. I believe they start with the name default by default. And then this one you'll want to rename as hover, and then this one will be pressed. You'll know that you're getting conflicts down here when you get this giant warning. It's because your properties are named the same thing in here. So that's kind of your hint that something's gone awry there, which is why we're going to name this one hover, and that error goes away, and then pressed for this one. That way, when you go ahead and create a new one, oops, I don't know what I did there. When you go, what's happening? Let's see, when you bring in a new one, you can change which state you want to use. You also can access any of the components that you have in your file by utilizing this tab navigation up top. So typically you're probably looking at your layers palette where you're seeing the names of your different pages in your Figma file and all of the layers down here. But there's also a tab for assets where you can see all of the components that are being utilized in your file. So in this case, I've got button in this file. So when I drag this over, I can change this to any of these different states. Any other questions on component demo?
Yeah, I have a question. So,
Sure.
how do you, this is kind of unrelated to the button, but how do you make that action happen when you are like creating your app? Like you said, this is like the hover option and this is the pressed option. How do you actually make that happen when you are kind of previewing your app?
Oh, like in a prototype?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So let's see. That's a good one. So if I'm in if you're in design mode, over here on the right side, if you want to switch over to prototype mode. So in this case, when you want to interact with something, you just like how you would set up a prototype with an actual screen, you can still prototype with a component. You can treat it just as you would on a screen, and it will remember that, okay, when you use this component, you want this action to happen. So the interaction that we're going to do, because it's a hover, we want it to be, we'll add the interaction up here. And so we're going to select while hovering. It will go to change to the hover state. So remember, it's looking at these different properties for these components. So we're going to have it again go to change to, and then change to hover. And you'll see this little arrow come up that changes to that state. You can also add a second interaction or when it's while pressing, you can have it change to the state of pressed. And then you've got that all set up. So let's say we're going to go into this send button. I'm going to start the prototype. And then I'm going to hover over send. Oh, and it's remembering the text because I didn't change the text, but this is me hovering over the send button. And then as I press, is it going to work? Because I'm on my laptop. There it goes. It'll remember that I'm in the press state and change to pressed state.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone have any other questions on anything? Cool. So that was kind of a brief overview of components. I'm going to jump a little bit back to the presentation. So thinking about components, you're probably at this point kind of cycling through your brain. Okay, there's a lot of different things in an app. There's a lot of different things in a website. Let's say you've gone ahead and you've updated your file to utilize these components. You're feeling great. Life is getting a little bit easier. You made those updates, but now you're getting ready to go into development and you're getting ready to talk to engineers. Maybe you're also bringing in another designer to help you out, but that designer doesn't have the same background on everything that y'all have done up until this point. They weren't there for all of the user research that you've done. They weren't there for any of the initial design concepting that you were doing. So how do you kind of get them up to speed and help understand where y'all are coming from? So getting there is going to be first with what's called a design library or a shared design library. As a team, you can set things like color styles, typography styles, and the core basics of your design language that can be shared across multiple files. And once you've built out those basics, you can start thinking about a design system. Now, I recognize that these phrases are very similar, so I want to kind of help clarify kind of the difference between the two. People will kind of use these a little bit interchangeably. And while there's a lot of similarities between a design library and a design system, really the best way that I can describe it is a design library is just a part of an overall design system. The design system is those reusable components that we talked about. It's the color, it's the typography, and that is all a piece of it. But there's also the other piece of guidelines that can help give both designers and engineers and developers a shared language to make their digital products consistent. A really big part of our jobs as designers is not only to design something that's really great for the user, but also is something that can actually be built by engineers. Otherwise, you've just created a bunch of images, and also be able to communicate that vision to them. Think about when you're designing something, we have a lot of information at our fingertips. We understand the business needs. We understand the market landscape, what the user behaviors and needs are based on the user research. And not all developers and engineers are necessarily going to have that background when you hand off your designs. They need a little bit more information from you as the designer and a lot more communication. We need to be able to communicate that vision to them to help stay consistent with our thinking that we've had leading up until this point. So that's why we document a lot of what we're thinking. And that helps if another designer joins the team too, so that they're not kind of in the dark trying to figure out what you were thinking leading up to this and kind of going on a little bit of a scavenger hunt. Another way to think about it is if you've ever heard the term style guide. Design systems will typically include some type of style guide or a pattern library. They're just pieces to kind of this overall puzzle of a design system. A true design system is going to give a designer or an engineer with limited to no context enough guidance that they need to join a team and get up to speed super quickly to understand the user experience. Good design systems will also help a designer know what they need and how to make it, and it can also provide some motivation and rationale behind what you're doing. It's helpful also if you're working on a product that isn't just an app or isn't just a website. It's kind of all of those things and touches a lot of different ecosystems so that users have a consistent experience across all of those things. Any questions? Cool. Well, I actually have a short demo for this one, and it's another file that I'm going to share so y'all can actually play around with a design library on your own. So let me jump to that. Because this one is kind of fun if you like got a little bit of time and you want to play around, because there's kind of a lot of possibilities here. So I want to make sure that y'all have enough time for questions on your own. Let me get the file real quick. Okay. So, oh, I forgot to share my screen. That would help. So this one is kind of the basics in building a design library. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you create a design. You can create a team library. Lets you share styles and components across different things. And each of these slides here are set up where y'all can kind of play around with how different color styles work. So you'll see kind of here, once I selected this, there's shared styles across this file, and you can
Hey,
play
Jen.
around. Oh, yep.
Oh, I'm trying to access the file and it looks like it says file not found when I try to click on the link you provided.
Oh, dang it. Okay, let's play around with something real quick. Hang on, stand by. Please. Okay. Oh, hang on. Ah, I know what I did wrong. Try this again. Ping me in the chat if it doesn't work this time.
Yeah, it works for me. Thank you.
Woohoo! Okay, cool. Awesome. Great to hear. All right, let me get my screen shared again. Cool. So like I said, this one is a little more interactive and I want y'all to kind of play on your own because I want to set aside some time for questions or anything. But this file in particular is like a demo where you can play around with different libraries. So if you're in here and you kind of see like, oh, team color styles. So this is an example here of color styles that you can set across an entire file. So this fuchsia 100, for example, this is calling from a shared team library. And if I go in here and I want to mess around with this color in here, I'm going to change this fuchsia pretty much everywhere it's used. Or it's going to, oh, I have to go to the style definition to edit it. There's different things, different settings and things that you can play around with and creating your own color styles and things like that. And there's also all these screenshots in here of how to do things like text styles and change those different things. But yeah, these are kind of the basics in starting a design system and a design library. There are a lot of possibilities in all of this, and I know that y'all are on kind of a tight timeline, but there is a little bit of time saving that hopefully y'all are able to take advantage of if you use components and libraries. And just a Q&A slide so I can share that real quick. But if anybody has any questions about anything about design, about components, anything, happy to answer.
Yeah, I have a question. It's more kind of related, more specific to what my team's thinking about. But I was wondering how you could kind of demonstrate like or create an interactive background. For example, like can we put a GIF or a program like in the back and have like a button in the front?
Yes, I can actually actually demo that. Let me see if I can Do I still have Figma open? I should. Cool. Let me make a new file. Oh, you know what? I'll do it in this playground file. So if you have an artboard, let's say here, and you want to add a GIF background, I don't know if I actually have one on here. Let me go grab one from the internet. So I've got this GIF right here. I've just dragged and dropped it off of where I had it on my desktop. And you can drop this in here into Figma however you want. Let's say I'm using it as a background, like you had mentioned. I've got it here. You can tell that it's a GIF in the format because it'll show that there's like a play button, and you'll know that you'll only be able to see it move in prototype mode. And then if I want to put my button on top of it, take this over here, put my button on top of that. Oops. And then if I go into prototype mode, once it loads, the GIF will be playing and I'll have my button on top. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I have another question actually. How
Sure.
can we show, like, for example, if we want to add like a shared component in our app that that will like kind of direct to, like, for example, Instagram, Facebook, or like iMessage, how do we kind of show that in our prototype, as in like okay, this opens up a tab that you can go to another app?
I think in that case, you'll just want to be super clear in how you design it, that the user would actually be leaving the app or website that you're designing in. Like, you don't want to create an experience, I think, that's jarring for users, that they're not going to a place they wouldn't expect. So some ideas on possibly like making sure that you include maybe the Instagram icon in that case, that they know that that's where they're going, or using the word like go to Instagram and things like that.
Okay.
That's kind of like when you see things that like share to, like those social
Yeah.
shares, you'll see like the Twitter bird and you'll see the Instagram camera icon, so that it's very clear that you're kind of leaving the experience and going to another one.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I see Rebecca shared the giveaway in the chat. Be sure to fill that out. Anyone have any other questions or things they need thoughts on?
This is kind of like a side question. Do you have like office hours or email that we can like send in questions like individually?
Sure. I actually have a slide with my email on it. Um, Let me pull that back up. So I'm not actually hosting office hours necessarily, but I am happy to answer questions and also answer questions about Willow Tree and opportunities. I brought Melissa with me as well to answer questions about internships and things like that at Willow Tree. I'm also on LinkedIn if you ever want to reach out and talk about things, but feel free to take down my email. I'll also put it in the chat so that y'all have it. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but thank you all so much for having me here today. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen, for an amazing presentation. I hope it was helpful to all the participants. And I think y'all saw in the chat, Melissa did send some information about Willow Tree. And Melissa, do you want to talk briefly about internships at Willow Tree?
Yeah, so we are currently hiring for our designer intern roles. We're focusing on our Charlottesville, Virginia, Durham, North Carolina, Columbus, Ohio, and Vancouver, Canada offices. And then we're also hiring for our full-time roles, which you can see in the job description. They are open now and we're starting to review them. So if you are interested, I would recommend applying sooner rather than later. But if you have any specific questions about the role, you'll be working directly with designers like Jen on our mobile or web apps, doing really cool work with mainly Fortune 500 companies. So really awesome work that we're doing at Willow Tree.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, thank you guys again so much for joining. Thank you again to Jen and Melissa for volunteering their time. And good luck with the rest of the Design-a-thon. Just a reminder, we do have a social coming up at 1 p.m. So if you want to take a break from designing, you can definitely join that. We'll be playing some fun online games. We have another workshop later in the afternoon. And if y'all have any questions at all, even related to what Jen was talking about earlier with creating components and prototyping, you can definitely ask in the office hours channel and we will try to help you. I'm basically available the entire weekend as well. So yeah, thank you guys so much.